I'm going to be showing you how to build this simple vanilla demo gallery. And this is just with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We have a little bit of interactivity here when we click on any of these pictures. And we have a little bit of CSS animation here. I will be using a CSS animation library for that part. But aside from that, this is going to be pretty much plain old vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so if you're new to those topics, this is a great little starter project for you. I'm going to be doing this here in CodePen inside of one of their projects. We'll log into CodePen, and you can click Go Make One after you've gone into the project menu. Obviously, you don't have to use CodePen. I'm just using it for this video. We can click on Basic HTML5 Structure, and just like that, we have a nice white screen with an HTML file with a little bit of starter stuff in here. So we'll just get started right now. Instead of using what they have in here, I do have some copy and paste HTML. We're not going to code out all of the HTML. I'm going to walk you through it, but we're just going to paste that in to have that done with. Link is provided for you here, and you'll just come to this gist, and you'll look at the HTML here. You'll click Raw, and that'll just open it up. You'll Command A to copy it, or Control A, Command C or Control C. And then back in here, again, select everything here and now paste with Command V or Control V. So we're just copying and pasting some different starter HTML. And go back to that gist, and you can hit Command left bracket or just click your back button. Scroll down a little bit and have a little bit of CSS to get you started. So once again, click Raw, Command A, Command C. Go in here to their styles directory, and in this SCSS file, you can overwrite all of that with the starter CSS. SCSS is syntactically awesome style sheets. It's just CSS with some superpowers and things. But the cool thing is that we can just write regular CSS in here, which is all we need for our purposes. As soon as we do that, we can hit Save All and Run, and we should get something happening down here. Actually, it looks like it's almost done, huh? But of course, we don't have any clicking. These pictures are all kind of just in this weird stack. So we've got some more work to do. But let's now go through all of this code and just kind of start from ground zero to make sure that it is clear what it is that we're doing. So this is an HTML file, hypertext markup language. The first line here is just announcing that this is modern HTML. You'll see that in every single HTML file just about. Here, this is just a language attribute. If we were building some international website or something, we'd be more concerned with that. Now, in HTML, the main things to focus on are the head and the body. The body is going to be what we actually see in the page. The head is some sort of behind the scenes stuff that we need to include. This stuff right here is pretty boilerplate. It just establishes some basic responsive design behavior, allowing especially like a mobile browser, to be able to scale things out a little bit when we get more into responsive web design. Anyway, so this kind of comes along for the ride. I'm including a normalized style sheet. So if you're not familiar with CSS, all of the different browsers have like all their different default rules. So normalize is a nice little general use case where it gives it sort of normalizes all of the browsers so we don't have too many weird default styles going on, and it gives us some sensible sort of best practice defaults to go along with that. Here I'm just linking to a Google font. That's why you see this lettering here. You're more than welcome to go over to fonts.google.com, go to the main page, and pick any other font that you would want. And you could click, like you select a couple of styles, click embed, and right here it just gives you another link to a special style sheet that will sort of activate these Google fonts. So that's what's happening there. And then here we have this animation library. I'm going to come back and talk about this later on when we get to that part. So let's skip that for now. And this is linking our HTML to our style sheet. So again, the purpose of this is mainly to make sure the HTML has everything it needs to do styles. Let's take a look at something. I'm going to highlight all of that code, and I'm going to hit Command/ to comment it all out. And I'll also, well, it looks like our comment, actually, I'm just going to delete it out for a second. So I'm literally just going to hit delete, hit save all, and run. This is what the page looks like with none of that CSS. Very, very plain. So I'm going to hit Command Z to bring that back. So that gives you a pretty rough idea of what CSS actually does for us. Here we have the title, which just shows up in like the tab of a full web page. No big deal there. Let's take a look at the body. We have some HTML code here, and as you're starting to see what HTML is, again, hypertext markup language, and its job is just to describe the content that's on the page. That's it. We saw earlier how when we removed all the styles, it was really just pretty plain Jane. So we see that the primary focus of HTML is not to do a lot of styling or anything, just to put the stuff on the page. And we use these opening and closing tags to describe the type of content that it is. So here we have an H1 tag, which just represents a top level heading. And most of the time we want our top level heading to match our title attribute. Helps a little bit with the SEO. It's sort of a best practice there. And then we get into the next part of our page, which is the main. So if we collapse this down, we can see this is our heading 1. Then we have our main display, which is all of our pictures and stuff. And then down here, we have this silly footer in here, okay? So those are the main parts. Well, I shouldn't say that. Those are the parts of our page. And there's a main part right here, which is sort of the feature of where our images are. So here, I'm going to collapse this down again. Here we have 2 children. So that's a term you're going to hear when talking about HTML, parent and children. So the main is the parent, and the parent has 2 children. A figure tag here and a div tag. So a figure tag just says, usually encloses an image, and sometimes optionally you can include a caption with that image. So we have a figure tag, and it has been uniquely identified with this ID attribute. So that part of our display is this here, like the main image display. And the idea is that these are going to be smaller images. When we click on those, if we go back to the original, when we click on these small images, it updates here in the main display. That's what we see here, display, or we could have called it main display. Inside of that figure tag, we have an image tag. And hopefully that makes sense, because we got to have an image to show. Not only that, but the image needs to know, it needs to have some type of a file. So I'm just using this image from Unsplash here. If I was to copy this link and directly paste it into the browser, you would see that is in fact the image. So this is an SRC attribute on this image tag. Now, images should have alt tags with them that just verbally describe a little bit more about the image. If we were visually impaired or blind, we might have a screen reader that describes the page to us. So that would all be part of the process of reading or describing the page. Secondly, if I come in here and I have a broken link, let me just break that link intentionally by misspelling it. And when I do that, notice that it at least gives us a caption of what's supposed to be there. Let me hit Command Z to undo that, bring our picture back. And then also it helps with our search engine optimization, or SEO. We also have on here some classes. This is related to our CSS animation library that we're going to be using, and we'll revisit that when we get to that part. So again, HTML, which consists of opening and closing tags, and a parent will wrap a child. Again, the main has 2 children, and the figure has 1 child right here, an image. The image, we have some attributes like an SRC for an image, an alt tag, a CSS class attribute, and then an ID. That an ID should be unique per page. So with the class, though, we can sprinkle those in wherever we want as much as we want to. It just so happens that we're only animating one little part of our page here, but CSS classes are used for all kinds of things. Anytime you want to have like a reusable group of styles for something. Next, we have another div, or not really another div, a div. Div is a nice tag to use when there's really no better name. You just want sort of a row of things, just like a block or a row of things. You might want to use a div. And that is the idea. If we go back to the original here, we have this strip, like this is a div here with these 5 figures, and each figure has its own image. Okay, and that's what we see here. There's going to be 5 figures if I was to collapse all of these down. Those are the 5 figures we see in the strip. And inside of those figures is nothing but the same image stuff that we saw earlier. We actually don't need this width in here. I need to cut that out. So we just have a source and an alt attribute, just like we've seen before. And that's really all there is to the HTML. But just with that little bit, you already know what HTML is, what its purpose is, about the head and body tag, about some of the tags in HTML, such as divs, main, h1, and how it all kind of connects with parents and children. And that'll be important when we go into our CSS. Here we have a footer tag. Wrapping that footer, we have a paragraph, and with our text here, like so. The P tag, now people say it's a paragraph. It's not really a paragraph. That's just a few words. But again, we use a P tag just to generally block off a section of text and say, hey, this is sort of one block of text. HTML. Let's take a look in our CSS, or SCSS technically, but it's really just CSS. So we can see here, we can actually just, one of the ways we can learn how these things work is just comment these lines out one at a time. So if I comment out the background color, as you can guess, it's going to turn white. Okay, so there's that background color. And then the color is the color of our text. Font family is just what we pulled in from the Google font. All right, so let's get to work on the rest of our CSS. Let's grab our main tag. So like we talked about with CSS, all we're doing is grabbing something from our HTML, opening up a set of braces, and then adding some rules along with some values. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, you see how all this stuff is kind of just stacked in a column? Not really what we're going for. I want to take charge of the way that it's displayed, and we're going to use the value flex. And as soon as we do that, it's not going to be what we want, but all of a sudden everything is kind of lined up in a row. The reason that works is because as soon as I say that I want the main tag to be a flex or a flex box, the direct children, these 2 kids, if you will, they line up in a row. That's what display flex does without any other settings. Maybe it seems like, well, why would we want that? Well, it's not, that's just the starting point. We need to add a few more rules to this. And in order to get this to work, I'm going to use some special flexbox properties. Now, these will not work unless the parent has display flex on it. So we're going to say flex direction column. You might be able to guess what that's going to do. As soon as we look at that, hey, everything is in a column. So I'm also going to make sure that there's no excessive margins on things. And I should mention, I don't know why I didn't say this earlier, what the heck is this rems here? Okay, rems. Rem stands for, it's a unit of measurement. And so rem stands for root ems. Not sure what M stands for, if it stands for anything, but it's, what it does is it looks at the main body tag, and whatever the default font size is, so say 16 pixels, in fact, I'll put a comment here. This means 16 pixels times 0.5, so that would be 8 pixels. And the reason we do it this way is because it gives us more flexibility when we use rems. Like, let's say in different viewports for a more complicated layout, I could just change my root font size instead of making it the default 16 pixels from the browser. And just by moving that around, I can get some relative spacing and padding and on different screen sizes. So that's the reason why we use rems. Yeah, sure, you could just straight put 8 pixels in here. And in terms of this particular viewport, it doesn't seem like it makes much difference. So I'll be adding a few comments as we go forward. Speaking of which, I'll do /* and I will say 100 VW. So VW stands for viewport widths. And just to clarify one more time, in an SCSS file, you are allowed to do // but I want to do it this way because this is the more pure CSS style in case you're just writing regular CSS. All right, so we have that. Viewport widths, what the heck is that? That is take the entire width of the viewport, whether that's a big giant monitor or a tiny phone. It means we want the spacing of this main to be able to fill up the whole viewport. Okay, so that's what viewport widths is. Again, some of these rules don't have a major visible effect in this particular situation, but it gives me a chance to show you some additional CSS, and it does help on some of the mobile display, especially when you go to enhance some of these features in the future. Next up, let's start working on our film strip. So what do I mean by film strip? That is right here. Remember this div that has those 5 images in it? We want to get those in a row. If you recall, how do we get things in a row? We can say film-strip display flex. And while we're at it, no need to duplicate this rule. We'll cut that from there and we'll say, hey, main and film strip, go ahead and behave like flex boxes. Let's see what that does for us. It gets these pictures in a row. Of course, they're way out of whack, but we're getting closer. And that's what Flexbox does. It's really, really handy to use that when we want to, well, get things all lined up in a row or all lined up in a column. All right, let's move forward with a little bit more here. Let's keep working on film strip, actually. So again, film strip is that the ID that we gave to this particular div. Really, we only have one div. I could have just said div instead of ID film strip. Now is border bottom, and we're just going to make that really thin, like 1 pixel. We'll keep it solid as opposed to dashed or something, and we'll just give it a slightly off-white color. Okay, so these color codes, the hashtag colors, again, we used hashtags over here for ID tags. Inside of CSS, so the hashtag here will pull in things that have an ID in the HTML, but they will also be used to describe color. For more information on that, I would suggest you just do a Google search for hex color code, and it's just a base 16 way to represent all kinds of colors. So there's any number of utilities that allow you to visualize that. We don't have to use hex colors. There's RGB, HSL, but we could have a whole different lecture or video on color. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Just know that that is sort of off-white. I'm going to hit Command C. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to say do that for the top also. So we have this very thin border on the top and bottom, both with the same color. And if we hit Save All and Run, we start to see that, hey, there are the borders. So moving right along here, let's go ahead and lock this max width down to 1200 pixels. And that's going to start to rein in our images so they don't get all crazy. You can see they are still crazy, so we have a little bit more work to do. But 1200 pixels, I just kind of picked that sort of randomly. It's just a nice width. If we're on a wide screen, I don't necessarily need this thing to be, going all over the place. So we want to limit how wide that film strip becomes. And we're going to go back and add a little bit of padding, and this time you will be able to see the difference. Okay, so right here's our spacing in between the border and the film strip div, and if we go back and look at it now, it's increased a little bit right over here. That is because I said I wanted a top and bottom padding. I'm going to add this as a comment. This is the top and bottom padding, followed by the left and right padding. So I don't really care about the left and right padding, just doing the top and bottom here. And that's why we can say, we could have said padding dash top and padding dash bottom. This is a shorthand way to do that when we use 2 numbers. All right, what else do we need to do? We need to start working on some of these figures and images and get them reined in a little bit. So I'm going to come in here and say margin 0 and padding 0. I don't think that's that gap. So for whatever reason, The figure just insists on having this weird 40 pixel padding and margin, all this weird spacing. So we're just removing that. We're just saying no margin, no padding on the figures, and it tightens them up as we move forward here. All right, so next we're going to, let's work on our images that are inside of those figures. Let's grab our image tag so you start to see the CSS pattern. We're going to say, hey, you can take care of your own height, but your maximum width should only be 100%. Let's take a look at the visual effect of that. And that gets us pretty much what we want, right? So let's talk about this percent here, this percent. Percent is sort of like VW. We looked at VW units, which is sort of the entire viewport width. But percent says, hey, image, yeah, you can take up as much space, 100% of the space, but you need to check with your parent. So whatever the figure, actually in this case, whatever the film strip is, that's the maximum width it's going to take up. So it's 100% in relation to the first parent, or in this case, a grandparent. So we go in here to image. Here's the image. Here's the parent. Here's the grandparent. It basically works its way up its ancestors until somebody says, hey, this is the width. And you remember that film strip, we had set a max width on that thing. And so the max width of these images is going to be 100% with relation to that film strip. Let's see, what else do we need to do here? Let's do a little bit more cleanup in terms of getting these things aligned. So we'll say grab the main and grab film strip and grab each of the figures. So here we see a child selector. I am saying grab the main, that's fine. See this comma here. Then go to the film strip and grab all of the figures inside of the film strip. And we're going to say align items center. Action. So this should be vertically aligning our images, but it's not. And here's why. It's because we need to also say, actually we can go up here and reuse the selectors we already have. We're going to say main, film strip, and film strip figure should all be flex parents. So that means that this is a flex parent. This is a flex parent, and this is a flex parent. Now, since this is a flex parent, its children are going to listen, and they're going to align center. Let's take a look at what that does now. Oops, I have some broken CSS here. Let's take that out. Try to run that again. And when we do that, there we go. Things are aligned center. So this rule did not work until film strip figure also bought into this and became a flex parent. So you see that relationship that has to be established for a flex parent and a flex child. So we're just about finished here with our CSS. Really all we're going to do now is add a little border. So we're going to say, remember that border we talked about earlier, the yellowish one that's got the rounded corners? Let's add that now. Let's say go into the display or the main display and grab that image. So I don't want that border on all of the images. I only want it on the main display image here. And let's say border, make it really thin, 1 pixel, solid, and I have another color code here, FFC9222. That'll give us that nice yellowish sunset yellow, I think is what it's called. We're going to say border radius 4 pixels. That's going to round out those corners there. Okay, and then one other rule I'm going to put in here that's not going to become apparent until later is the max height. Let's actually take a look at the result here. So we can see we have that nice border going on here, and now we have a little bit better sizing on our image, right? So what this is saying is, look, now actually I'll just show you. As I move this up and down, the image kind of gets bigger. So this is a nice property to have. We're saying, look, the maximum height that you can do image is 40% of the viewport height. And that's why as I scroll this up and down, that display changes. For our purposes, this suffices. The only other thing that we want to add that I can think of for now is we want to have our cursor turn into a little pointer finger when we hover over that. And that gives us an opportunity to learn about the pseudo selector hover. We're going to say if you are an image inside of the film strip, anytime I focus or anytime I hover, I'll mention what focus is in a second, we're going to say your cursor should be a pointer. All right, so now if we save all and run, if we hover over this, we can see that our cursor is indeed a pointer. Now, the reason I included focus, let's look at a couple of things here. So this is, we've already seen like regular selectors. We know this is any image inside of a film strip. But we don't want it to always have, we want to say when we hover over it. And this is a pseudo selector. Pseudo selector. So it only selects this element or applies this rule when the element is in a certain state, when we're hovering over it or if we're focusing on it. And focus has to do with if we're using our keyboard to navigate. So mostly hover is what's going to take place. So this is pretty much where we need to be. I think there may be a little bit more padding and spacing, but based upon the viewport that we have here, this will suffice. Let's move forward to our JavaScript. All right, so we'll save all and move in here to JavaScript. So let's talk about the steps that need to happen here. So I'm going to write some pseudocode. I'm going to hit /*, or just some comments. I'm going to just map out the steps that are necessary here. I'm going to do this one at a time. So our current to-do is we want to, essentially what's going to happen here is, let me type this out actually. So whenever we click on one of these images, the way that this is working is anytime we click on the image, whatever the source and alt tags are on this image, those get copied up here to the main display. And this just gets swapped out every time. So that's what I put into words. This is where we're going with our initial JavaScript. Let's get that started. In order to make that work, we're going to need to grab some things from this page. We're definitely going to need the main display. So let's grab that from our document and assign it to a variable. So I'm going to say const display. So in JavaScript, the const keyword signals to JavaScript that, hey, I am going to reserve some space in memory. And in fact, this is the name that I want to assign. So this is just a made up name here. So const is a JavaScript keyword to reserve space in memory. And after that, we need to give that space in memory some name. I'm going to call it display. And what are we going to put? What are we going to assign to this variable? We're going to say go to our document. And I'm just going to put this code in and we'll talk about it in a second. So pause the video for a second and see if you can make sense of what just happened here. Everything in JavaScript needs to be modeled as what's known as an object. In fact, I'm going to show you what an object looks like right now, because we're going to need this later on. I'm going to say, okay, so let me, we're going to come back to the purpose of this. For right now, the purpose is to show you what a JavaScript object looks like. It's anything that we can create that we just wrap braces around and assign to a variable. This is, in fact, in and of itself, a JavaScript object. Okay. Now, besides those objects that we can create, the entire ecosystem of JavaScript comes with a bunch of built-in objects. One of those objects that we have access to in the browser is known as the document. The document is an object representation of all of these HTML elements. So we are telling JavaScript, access the document object, which again is a model of all of the HTML elements. And inside of that object, notice this little single dot here, that's dot notation. So we're going to use dot notation to access properties and functions or methods. So we'll come back to what properties are, but functions or methods are anything involving action. So in this case, we want to say go into the document, and I want to query or ask for something, and I'm going to ask for it by using a CSS selector. And that's what we see here. What we're saying is, hey, go into the document and find the first thing that matches, that is an image inside of something with an ID of display. Looking back at the HTML, right here, that query selector is going to say, oh, here's image. Let me see if I can find it. Here's display, and here's image. And this element is going to end up being assigned to this variable display. We can test that out by saying console log display. So remember, that will just log in our console the value that's connected to this variable. I'm going to hit Command Option I, and we want to hit Save All and Run. And when we do that, let's actually clear, well, I think it's going to have some of this pollution stuff from CodePen. Now I can't run it again until I change it. Okay, let's just change this a little bit here. We'll also say hi while you're at it. Okay, save all and run. Okay, if we look closely here, there it is. There is that image that was query selected, if you will, from the page. And that is document query selector. Just like that, we have our display, main display that we need to use. All right, next up, we need to grab all of these film strip images. So following a similar pattern, I'm going to say use that document model, which keeps track of all of the things in our HTML. But this time, I don't want you to just get one thing. I need you to grab all of the things that are inside a film strip and that are image. Let's go ahead and log that this time. See how that's going to look. FS images. All right, here we go. We'll clear that, save all, and run. And look at that. We get this thing called a node list back. So node, again, first of all, this has nothing to do with Node.js, if you ever heard of Node.js. Nothing to do with that. But the thing is, in HTML, JavaScript looks at each of these things in our HTML as nodes. So this is a node. This is an element node. Here is a text. Oops. Here is a text node. All of this text in here. So a node is just, so this is saying a node list. Hey, I have some things from the HTML document. I call them nodes, meaning JavaScript calls them nodes. And I have a list of them. So we have 5 images. So for all intents and purposes, in this case, a node is just a thing in our JavaScript, whether that thing is an element or some text or whatever it is. In this case, that thing is an image, and there's 5 of them, and they're wrapped up in this list of nodes. All right, so far, so good. Let's think about what do we need to do. It says whenever we click on an image, meaning what we really mean here is an FS image. So we have these FS images. How can we go over to each one of them and say, hey, image number 1, I need you to listen for a click. Image number 2, I want you to listen for a click. What if we had 100 of these images? We don't want to do that manually. We need a good way to write a loop to do that. Here we go. fsimages.for each. Okay, for each. Makes sense so far, hopefully? For each FS image. So notice the convention here. FS images, plural, reinforces that this is a collection of 5 things. And then for each one of those, look at each individual image and do something with that image. Now, in order to do something, we need a function. Here's how we create a function, our own function. So we have these built-in functions that came along inside of this document object. More properly, those are called methods. But here we're writing a function. And all I'm going to do right now is say console.log fsimage. All right, let's clear the screen. Let's hit save, run. And when we look carefully, look at that. We are logging one at a time each one of those image tags. So we're getting close to what we need to have happen. So this is saying go into this collection of images. For each one, grab it and send it into this function in here. All right, so just in this case, we just need to log them. Let's do something more useful though. Instead of logging the function, let's go ahead and say fsimage.add event listener. And an event listener is another one of those built-in methods. So when we grab one of those image, just like almost everything in JavaScript, under the hood, it becomes modeled as an object, and it gets all of this functionality that we can do with it. One of the things we can do with it is we can add an event listener. And we can say, I want to listen for a click. And how do we do something in JavaScript? We do a function. So here, once again, we're going to say, okay, there's a click that just happened. And every time there's a click right now, we'll just say hi. Okay, let's clear it. Let's hit save all and run. We're not going to see anything in the console until we click one of our images. Every time we click an image, it says hi. So that is working as we want. So once again, we're grabbing all of the images. For each image, we want to do something. We want to grab the individual image and we want to add an event listener. Anytime there's a click on that image, we want to do something in here. So this is a common pattern in JavaScript where we have functions inside of other functions. Let's do something a little bit more useful. It turns out that whenever there's an event that happens in the browser, we can say, hey, this function that's supposed to be connected to the click listener, we want this function to grab that event because we're going to need some information. This time, let's do console log event. Let's bring up our terminal again and clear the screen, save all, run. This time when we click, look at that. We get an object, a mouse event object with a bunch of information in here. Most of that we don't need. Almost all of it we don't need. There is one particular thing inside of that object. If we were to open this up and go all the way through it, let's see if we can find it right here, target. We want the target. That's a property. So that event that's fired in the browser gets modeled as a JavaScript object. And one of the properties, in other words, it's not something that does anything. It's not a function or a method. It's a property. It just describes something about the event. And in this case, event.target lets us know, hey, who's responsible for this event? I kind of think it's a weird name, target, but it's sort of like the source. And there is actually a source element, but we're going to stick with target. There's some just minor differences. Target will work better for what we're trying to do. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that again. See if we can click on here. Let's clear this out and click. And there we go. Every time we click, we get that individual image. That's what we're going for. So that looks pretty cool. Okay, moving forward, we can get more information. We can actually say source, and we can say event.target.alt. And you can probably guess where this is going. All right, and we're going to save all and run. This time when I click, there is the image source, and here is the image alt tag. Beautiful. Can you guess what we need to do now? We need to grab the display, and we need to say, hey, display, I know you are being modeled as a JavaScript object, and I know that you have a, actually not, display, I should rename this. That's not display. Let's make that display image to kind of keep our variable names more consistent. Display image equals, no, actually display image.src equals what? Event.src. Oops, that's src. What's the next thing we need to type? Like that. So again, we have this display image. That display image is right here. It's this image. It has a source and it has an alt. All of this can be modeled in JavaScript. So we can easily manipulate it by simply saying, get me that source, but hey, I want to replace it. See this equal sign? Take the thing on the right and assign it as the source for our display image. And just like that, we have undefined. That's not helpful. Let's see if we can troubleshoot this thing here. Pretty silly mistake, didn't we? How come it's undefined? And hopefully you got this. Hopefully you're screaming at this video saying, hey, stupid. No, we need event.target.src. It's not the event that has the source information. It's the event target. It's that image that's associated with the event. And when we click this and run it, we can see we have pretty much a fully functioning gallery app. Now, the next steps involve the CSS animation, but I think I'm going to save that to a part 2 for this video. So I'll make this a playlist because this thing has gone on long enough. So to summarize, if we can, we have HTML, which is responsible for describing our content. We learned that the HTML has a head and a body. Inside of the head is mostly a lot of boilerplate stuff, but we also connect to some style sheets, including our own. We have a title, and we have inside of our body, we have certain tags that we are actually displayed, and that's going to be like our H1 tag, that's going to be like our main tag, our footer tag. And we learned about a parent-child relationship, a hierarchy, if you will, with respect to these tags. Then we got into CSS. We learned about like colors, fonts, padding, and the units like rems, viewport widths, viewport heights, percentage, and pixels. We pretty much touched upon every viable CSS unit. We learned about Flexbox. We learned that a Flexbox works by creating a flex parent. And as soon as we do that, the flex children, but only the direct flex children, not the grandchildren, just the regular children, are going to line up in a row. And what Flexbox opens up is the ability to do stuff like align items, justify content, stuff like that. We added some borders. We learned about max width and all kinds of units. Just you can include your questions in the comments. And we implemented some basic JavaScript here. And there's in part 2 will just be mostly just JavaScript, and we'll work on handling our CSS animations and getting that nice fade in, fade out action. We learned about how, which actually I'm going to delete this for now because this actually comes into play when we try to tackle the animation situation, and we already did that to do. So let's clean that up. And yeah, we have these different pieces of our HTML that can be modeled as JavaScript objects. Those JavaScript objects, we can access properties and methods with dot notation. This is a built-in document object, which is a model of that HTML page. And we can use CSS selectors with query selector. We got to make sure that we put quotations around these because these are strings. If we did not put the quotations, this would be interpreted, this would break, but JavaScript would be trying to be like, are you giving me a variable that starts with a hashtag or something? I don't know what's happening here. So that's why we include the quotations. That's strings or string data, which tells JavaScript, yeah, just read this exactly as it is. It's inside of quotes. As opposed to this out here is not in quotes. That means it's a variable. That means it is connected to another value. So we go into our HTML document model, we grab this image, and we assign it to this variable name. In this second instance, we're grabbing a collection or a node list of all of the images inside of FilmStrip. And then finally, we had this loop where we went over all of our FilmStrip images one at a time, grabbed the image, and we listened for a click. And when that click happened, we accessed the click event. We figured out which image was clicked. We took that SRC, and we assigned it as the display image src. And the result was the main functionality we're going for. So in part 2, we're going to continue. It's going to be basically all JavaScript. It's going to be just a little bit more complicated, but definitely a shorter video because there won't be a whole lot. But we will be getting this set up so that we have the fade in, fade out effect in full. So thanks for hanging in there. This was a long video. I'm kind of worn out, so that's enough for